G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff. Feminism is a dirty word in China. Don't let anybody fool you that just because in the West feminism is communist, it is authoritarian, it is pro-CCP, it is, however, a historic taboo in China for women to have power. Now, it's one of the few olds that communism still embraces. And a lot of people don't understand this. See, it's not feminism that is the dirty word, although it is technically a dirty word because feminism implies the state does not give equal rights. And any organized feminist movement is nearly impossible. You have to be an organ of the state and state power. And is why they fund and support foreign feminists while saying that women in China don't need feminism. Now, since Xi Jinping has come to power, young women in China, particularly in Hong Kong, again, it's seen as organized feminism is seen more as a foreign entity, a societal wedge. And it's one that China uses in the West. And though they have many phrases for feminism, and they probably care more about equality than the rest of the world, it's about organized feminism and classes, right? Now, gender gap and all these things, right? They again see this all as foreign influences, right? That it's interfering with the party's natural course of progression towards an egalitarian society. And that China, despite the arrests of the Feminist Five and the debates in China, which ended, of course, with feminism outlawed, because it's an insult to the state. However, most people will not tell you this. They will not actually explain in the nuance that China is not anti-feminist. It is, though, organized feminism, which is a growing but steady suppressed movement, because they believe, right, that they are the inheritors of socialism, right? That the state isn't addressing sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, domestic burdens, and of course and pay gaps, and of course the traditional gender role to support population growth is not equally financially supported. They want suffrage. In other words, they want power. They want an end to social surveillance, censorship, and legal restrictions on women that forbid them from organizing. They want exemptions to the war. See, feminism has now become a class in upper society in China. And it's actually the reason for Chinese sluggish economy, because as citizens' discontent grows, spending decreases. See, feminism was the driving economy, okay? The spending on dresses, the spending on flowers, the spending on makeup, the spending on jewelry, the spending on perfumes. You look at spending, and particularly in China, spending by and for and on women was extremely high compared to men, particularly household spending, where luxuries, though rare, were expensive, such as luxury handbags. China, the luxury handbag capital of the world. People would have you believe it's Switzerland. But no. Feminism was the driving force of the economy. So what happened? Well, men started avoiding women. The Left Behind Men started as a small movement and grew to 30 million by 2015, By 2025, it's believed that there are now 300 million single men in China because they don't meet the strict standards. Now, you've heard of 666 in the West, right? 6 foot, 6 inch, and 6-figure incomes. Well, they have this in China. They have marriage markets in China. If you have to buy a bride. You have to provide her with a house. For her, right? You have to provide her with a car. And you have to provide her with a steady lifestyle or no home. No, I forget the exact word for it, but it translates roughly to no happy, joy in your life. She will make your life a miserable living hell. And why is that? Because actually in China, women never had equal rights. They always had privilege. Women used to hold more university positions. They used to hold more high-paying office work. Women, particularly unmarried women from the ages of 25 to 35, used to have priority hiring in what's called the Iron Rice Bowl. That is the middle to upper class civil servants. But Chinese men held positions of power within the party, right? It was a... now, women have 100 times more power than men in many fields, right? Doctoral, academic research, they're more likely to be funded. Did you know recently a Chinese woman who defected to China from Harvard University was hired 6-figure salary to design the new Chinese stealth fighter? You know, she had been sent, groomed, educated, funded, multi-millionairess, lived in the West. She got into university, Chinese, back to doctoral thesis. She researched, I forget the exact name of it, but it's basically composite materials, but it's a more modern, more advanced version of composite materials. It's not quite super plastics. These are specialist aluminum alloys, composites that use ceramics, and so they use both the benefits of an alloy and a composite material, and layering and atomic arranging, and very specialist scientific cutting-edge technology, right? Materials research. So she got poached from Harvard after a doctoral thesis on super materials, and so she went to China, designed their new stealth fighter. But what sparked off the problems is that none of her material research had anything to do with this, with aircraft. She had no idea how to design an aircraft. But she took the job failed, and in China, they executed her for her failure. Her family tried, of course, to take action. But most of the time when you look at Chinese women and status of Chinese women in society, they are precious, to say the least. They are Ming vases, where legally women can accuse men of anything without proof and must be believed. Believe all women come from China, okay? It's a Chinese export. Western data, however, is starting to show that there's a slowdown, particularly as Chinese slow down, as companies have lost 37% of their profit in the previous decade. Companies have dropped profit by about 37%. Chinese GDP has experienced negative growth. However, because Xi Jinping prints money, the Chinese economy is printed up. China is bankrupt. But because China is a slave state, they pretty much just print money and, they remake the rules as they go along. But their strategic de-risking, as it's called, due to geopolitical tensions. Even some Chinese firms have moved to Vietnam, another what they call neutral, non-frontline areas. So wherever you see a Chinese company move, you know that's a country they're not going to invade. So you know they're going to invade Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and the Philippines because they're not moving to and Thailand, because they're not moving to Thailand, Philippines, Korea, or Japan. They're moving anywhere but. So you know where the front lines are if you have any brains. And see, this is why the Chinese state has been moving towards women, because they need women in the workplace. You can't send 100 million men to war if they, So they created an outcast society of men that they could throw away. This is what Ukraine did. This is what many countries have done leading up to war. They start a throwaway society. And, of course, the first thing they throw away is the jobs for unskilled men, and start hiring women and upskilling women and replacing you with migrants or anybody but you and your sons. But local branches of the CCP are heavily invested in tech industries, consumer good industries, and they're suffering. It's a disconnect between the 10,000 party elite who are invested in the profitability of the Chinese state and make money off all the commodity trading, and the tech industries and consumer good industries, which are suffering low profits because China sees them, as well as organized feminism, as a competition to their power. Remember, feminism is just a tool. It is never intended to have power sharing in China. Even the elites, right? They don't power share, right? They are organized into cartels, of which there are 3 major factions, and then you've got a dozen minor factions. You have the Mao faction, the Li Sun faction, which is based on earlier writings of communism, and then you have the Deng. The Deng, I forget the other name, but was deputy premier for a while. They created a faction, and they're known more commonly as the Reform faction. Now, the Mao and the Li Sung faction are against. Now, these factions do change names. Like the Mao is sometimes referred as the old guard, and then you have the Liang faction as the new guard, and then you have the Deng faction as the reformists. All right, but they're all communists who just have their own spin. It's like which Nazi do you prefer, or which one of Mussolini's henchmen do you think is going to take over? It's not they're secret. They're secretly feminists, or they're secretly capitalists, or they're secretly going to become liberal Democrats. I mean, they remember, they drove the Liberal Democrats out, and those who refused to leave China were executed. But they see feminism as a tool of control, right? To keep society divided, to keep men poor, because poor men work hard in the factories, 9-hour days to generate profits. But China, right, overproduces. But what they do is for every product that's produced, right, they sell it at a Western price, and they add that Western price to their GDP. So they have the money in the West, then they print the same amount in equivalent yuan in the East, and then they spend that money in the West to buy stocks and bonds, and then ship that money to China, which they again convert to China. Well, they don't ship that money to China. Again, they use that money in the West, but what they do is in China, if they earn $1 million in a country, they'll print $1 million in equivalent yuan in China. This is why they digitize their currency. It's a complete false economy. There's no GDP, right? China's GDP is just, we print money, right? We earn money, we print money. Oh, they sell something to Russia, they print money. They just, it's just total insanity. And this is why Western companies are pulling out, because what happens is that the Chinese take the profits, or half the profits of the Western company, right, and pay the workers in Chinese currency, so they can't move the money out of the country, trapping the workers in China. And they can't leave. It's illegal to move China. If you go to China now, and any money you spend, right, you can't take out. You have to spend it. You can't take money out of China. Officially, they claim you can take less than $10,000, but it's only if it's your currency, not their currency. And good luck trying to buy foreign currency in China. All foreign currencies are confiscated by the banks and given to the central bank, which is replaced by the equivalent amount of yuan. It's all fake. Now, of course, this is totally destabilizing the world, because China is not competing. They're cheating, right? This is why they are pushing feminism so hard in the West, to destabilize the West, right? This is why, if you look, even advertisers, everywhere I go, there's Chinese advertising for anything and everything, because it's summer here, it's bikinis. It doesn't matter who or what. Other websites, it's handbags, it's shoes, I've been bombarded on Facebook with ads for jewelry. It's insane. China is so desperate for real cash because they need cash in the West to buy stuff with, because nobody will take their money anymore. It's worthless, right? There's no backing to their currency. You can't buy anything with it. It's a trap, right? And of course, the economically ignorant, which is the vast majority of people, say, nah, it's just money. Of course we should print money. We need new money. We need to expand the economy, meet demand and supply. But no, the whole point of an economy is to not feed the whims of women and consumerism, but to cap it, to control it. And China used communism China used communism and feminism to come to power. But now what happened is that once the Mao and his fellows were in power, they reintroduced a new class system based on, they did not want to share power with millions of women. Right? They wanted these hags to go home and have children. Now, of course, they did at the point of a gun, and thus created a schism in society. But now to try to win back women, they've been more and more pandering to them. But again, like Korea, where you spend millions upon millions of dollars on women, what happens? They have less children, not more. The more comfortable women get, the more money they get, the less likely they have children, because they are less likely to share, right? Their maternal instincts are only driven in that narrow point of their youth. And of course, what happens? They don't want to admit the truth, right? Young women want older men. They want stable, mature men, right? They want stable, happy families, but they can't get it because they have been deceived by consumerism, just like in the West, and feminism. Feminism and consumerism are highly linked, as well as the desire for power. The problem is women get into positions of power like Mao's wife and realize, no, I'm not going to share power. And this is the thing, that China is ruled by a cabal of men who front for women. And this is the dirty secret of the CCP. Xi Jinping is not in power, okay? It's like the U.S. presidency. He only has power while he has the Senate or the Congress. He usually has to have both on his side. Otherwise, it's a constant struggle to get anything done. So what happens? You have an idiot run in Iowa who says, I'll hold Trump accountable. No, you are stalling, delaying, or extorting, right? This is the problem with power sharing. This is why power sharing liberal governments, particularly liberal democracies like Canada, parts of the US, always fail, right? This is why you have nothing that succeeds in California. The only time anything succeeds in California or getting passed in Massachusetts is when you're dumping money on the women. And because then they stop delaying, stalling, or getting in your way. Or in some cases like Iowa, the teachers threatening to strike. So the public votes the way they're told to vote because they don't want a teacher's strike. Right now, everybody's blaming US sanctions and US trade tariffs and other restrictions for destabilizing China. No, the dirty secret is it's feminism. Millions of men are not working 9-hour days, 6 hours a week. They're not going to nightclubs. They're not buying prostitutes. They're not getting married. Men going their own way is ending communism in China. And it is driving women insane. And that's the dirty secret that they don't want to tell you. It takes a lot of reading to understand why the Chinese economy is sluggish. You look at their buildings. Who do they build buildings for? Who do they buy homes for? Who buys all these expensive handbags, expensive dresses? Who funds women's lifestyles that are 2 to 3 times the average worker's income? Right? You do not understand how expensive silk is in China. Real silk. I don't mean synthetics. I mean gold handbag. Who buys a gold handbag in China? Right? That's a bar girl and that's a prostitute. Most women in China are for sale. You buy a wife. Now, I don't mean every Chinese woman, and I don't mean the higher you go in the social rankings and the upper class, the more beautiful the woman, the more expensive. And we go back to ancient Greece, and they said, unless you're a powerful man with a powerful arm, you do not have a beautiful wife, right? Because it's not just her you have to worry about. It's every Tom, Dick, it's every Aristophanes, Georgianopoulos, and Stephanopoulos willing to stab you in the back. The Achilles was notorious, and that's why they killed him, right? He was notorious for running off with other people's wives, and eventually they tracked him down and killed him. He thought he was invincible. If you look at the real stories behind fairy tales too, man, there's some tragedies. Cinderella is about a girl held slavery, dreaming for freedom. It was actually originally a Russian tale, translated from Russian to Italian, then to English, and then it languished for a couple of 100 years as a story about cinders in a German village. For some reason, when the English translated it was set in Saxony. I don't know exactly where or when it became the attention of Walt Disney, but it seemed to be a golden storybook, and Disney, it's something Disney acquired when looking for stories. But China has similar tales, only when they talk about these tales, they are more direct. The Cinderella story in China is about a young prostitute who becomes a nobleman's daughter, and then he sells her off to be a wife to a merchant, and she's miserable because she's the third wife of the third brother, and apparently that's like devil incarnate. It's like the lowest of the richest class, that she's miserable. She's doing all the household work while the other women, languish around doing nothing. So stories of women exploiting women are not new, but that is the story of Cinderella, folks, in a nutshell. It is a story of women exploiting women. And we see this story throughout history. But now we're seeing playing out that China's embracing feminism is turning mean and against them. Because remember, it was only outlawed in 2015 under Xi. And in the last 10 years, the crackdowns got worse. Here's crackdown on every organization other than communism. Right? But Chinese women, it was a power base that he was using against the West, marrying off daughters of communists to Western influences to basically make them pro-Chinese, to influence the West. But because these women in China were wanting equality, it was getting harder and harder for them to peddle influence with these women. And less Chinese women were willing to go to the West because they saw the West as, they saw the anti-Western propaganda. They thought they were going to be raped, sold into prostitution. You know who's doing that? Other Chinese. Of course, it's always a grain of truth in order so that people can, be afraid. It's like the stories about Russia. But what they don't tell you, it's all responses to sabotage by Western intelligence of the Russian economy. We get to the rules of 48 power and far more complex issues, but feminism in general, the sad truth is it is a political weapon. It is communism, but feminism in China is now taboo because it is a threat and an insult to the Chinese state to insinuate that the power imbalance in China, because remember, the promise of, you can't promise power to people, right, and then have a central government. It doesn't work. You can't have one and you can't have both. You either have a structured society or you have a egalitarian society where everybody has an equal vote. And if you gave everybody an equal vote, even then you'll have feminists wanting, as you hear with these feminists in China, wanting privileges where women are given special status, they're given exemptions from the law, and they're given power and money simply to take care of themselves because they're so important. And of course, the hate speech laws. Remember, in China, they do have hate speech laws. You can't. You slur a party member or their family, and you are dog mints, and these women want exemptions, because cattiness is their power. It's their weapon. That's why they want free speech laws, except for us. That's why they want hate speech laws on us, because hate leads to violence. Really? Then go after all the hate groups like Afrocentrics, feminists, right? The 4B movement is definitely a hate group, right? Oh no, rules for thee, not for me. And that is exactly what feminism is. It is rules for them, not for you. And of course, rule 1 of feminism is we make up the rules as we go along. Rule 2 is if men learn the rules, we change the rules. And so it goes. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and please support the channel. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you to everybody who has supported the channel. You can support me on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Even if some of you didn't enjoy it, I understand that a long-form story that withholds a lot of information from you may not be your cup of tea, I'm sorry it's not a picture book, I'm sorry that some people wanted a comic book or a manga or a movie, I'm sorry that my style is old form, long stories. But to those who really enjoyed my book, are the majority. So I appreciate all your feedback, and there's every story comes to an end, and new stories are coming. So thank you, each and every one of you. Bye for now.